given the fact that companies and corporations were involved. I mean, after all, corporations aren't people, no matter what over 100 years of business law says. Indiana's RFRA also protects individuals both in lawsuits or administrative actions brought by the government and in lawsuits brought by private parties. Now, some states, like New Mexico, do not allow RFRAs to be used as a defense in litigation where the government isn't a party. Also, the federal circuit courts are split about whether the federal RFRA can be used to defend against private lawsuits where the government isn't a party. So that's also different in some states and some federal circuits. Otherwise, it's the same law. Now, is there any mention about gays? The gay and lesbian community in particular, transgender folks involved here? No, not really, and that's because the word gay, lesbian, or sexual orientation doesn't appear in any of the RFRAs. In fact, until now, the most controversial RFRA case was last year's Hobby Lobby versus Burwell, which was about whether the federal government has a compelling interest in forcing a religious business owner to pay for different types of abortion and birth control and things of that nature. The big gay freakout is purely notional. No RFRA has ever been used successfully to defend anti-gay discrimination. Not in 20 years of the RFRA's nationwide history. So why is everybody so mad about Indiana's RFRA? Well, the fear is that it could be used to deny services to gay people in places of public accommodation like businesses and restaurants. But, like we've already talked about, no RFRA has ever been used that way before. Also, Indiana does not have a public accommodation law that protects against anti-gay discrimination in the first place. And do you know why they don't have it? They haven't needed it. Trust me, as strong as this lobby is, and as active as the activists are, if they needed one, they would have had one by now. It just doesn't happen enough for it to merit legal action. So, there's no state law in Indiana preventing anti-gay discrimination in businesses even before the state had the RFRA put in place. Now, notably, despite the lack of such a law, nobody can point to any Indiana businesses that were discriminating against gays. Now, that's not to say it didn't happen, occasionally some small case, but it certainly wasn't happening enough that it was brought to anyone's attention. So that's what makes this an informed attribute. Gay marriage is on many people's minds for obvious reasons. In truth, Indiana is merely catching up to states that have already had these RFRAs for decades. You know, like Illinois, for example, one of their close neighbors. They got its RFRA with the help of a young state senator named Barack Obama, who now says he can't imagine such laws. Hypocrite. Unfortunately, Indiana is now caught in the cultural crossfire. Now, does religious freedom protect... Easy for me to say. Does religious freedom protect... Does the protection of religious freedoms... I'll get it out eventually. Stay with me. I'm sorry, guys. Does religious freedom protections hurt gays? Well, it is entirely consistent to favor broad religious freedom protections and also favor gay rights. Many gays are in fact religious, and so themselves benefit from religious freedom protections like an RFRA. But even where gay Americans and religious Americans find themselves in conflict, There is ample room in communities to peaceably coexist, if you wanted to. And that's the whole point of an RFRA. No side gets an automatic victory card. The interests of all sides get weighed. So what do we do now? If you've made it this far, you know more about an RFRA than the Indiana situation than the average news consumer, because the media hasn't painted a fair and balanced picture here. So now, go out, share your knowledge. It's the only way to beat the swarms of aggravated news consumers who don't know any better than what they've seen in the papers or on CNN. The only way to push back against the informed attribute in this instance is to point to the actual attributes of the law. Before Indiana, RFRAs existed for over 20 years in 19 different states and in the federal government. There has been no parade of horrors. They are not a shield. They're not a sword. They can only be used to protect your religious freedom. It cannot be used to permit or license or give a green light to discrimination against gays or any other minority. If you're part of a minority and you're being discriminated against and it's legitimate discrimination, then these laws will not protect the people that are discriminating against you. It's that simple. But, and here's where things get interesting, it certainly brings out the hypocrisy of the left. Whether you're talking about certain so-called progressive governors around the state that are suspending official business travel to Indiana, or whether you're talking about the Apple CEO coming out and blasting Indiana for this law, while, of course, doing business in places like Saudi Arabia, you know, places where they still stone you to death or behead you for being homosexual. You come out, you're in the open, you're out of the closet, you're in danger. They kill you in these places for being gay. I wanted to go back now and let's talk about some common sense. Many of these states have felt the need now, if they haven't already had these laws in place, to start putting them in place because of things like the lady that ran the bakery, who didn't want to do the cake for a same-sex marriage, and the couple that ran the florist shop that, again, because of religious objections, didn't want to provide flowers for a same-sex wedding. Not to mention the couple of different wedding photographers who got hit up the same way. Many of these people faced legal backlash for taking a religious stand. The lady that ran the bakery, she ran her bakery for better than a decade. She had done business with the couple in question on multiple occasions. They came into her shop, they bought stuff at her bakery, she happily sold them stuff. When they asked her to do their wedding cake, she very politely explained, "I'm sorry, but as a matter of personal faith, I cannot participate in your ceremony." Instead of accepting that and accepting the recommendation, because this lady was nice enough to say, you know what, I know somebody else that can do just as good of a job as I would do that would be happy to do this for you. But instead of taking that recommendation, instead they go after her legally. In the end, she ended up closing her bakery, losing her business. Now, some people would think that's okay. And I would say, actually, it's okay if this was the result of them, instead of going after her through the courts and having the local city government come hard and heavy and trying to shut her down, if they had just said, you know what, that's fine. You don't want to be a part of this, then we don't want you to be a part of this. We're just going to tell all our friends, and, we're going to let word of mouth take care of this, and then people will decide if they want to keep doing business with you or not. I would be okay if that was the solution. And I think most Americans would be okay if that's how you went about it. But here's where the real problem comes in. You have heard me before when I address the gay and lesbian community as a whole. I've given you this warning a multitude of times, and I hope at some point you will listen. Be very, very careful about who you allow to speak for you. Not everyone who claims to be on your side is really interested in helping you move your agenda forward. They have an agenda of their own. And right now, they're using you as what they call, and important, please notice, it's what they call useful idiots. I'm not commenting on whether or not you're a useful idiot or not, but that's the way they look at you, because you're being useful, but you're not seeing what their real agenda is. Take that to mean whatever you want it to. That's the way they look at it. Their agenda is to try and destroy any semblance of constitutional constraints on our government. The Constitution is an obstacle to their agenda. Everybody from Stephen King to the White House has come out and made statements in regards to this law. Even the governor, who, while doing a terrible job of trying to defend it, spent the weekend and a good part of the first part of this week trying to defend this law. As he should. There is no reason to back down. This law is not disgraceful. This law is not discriminatory. This law is not an attack on anyone. It is a simple affirmation that the government will acknowledge and honor the First Amendment. That's what it is. And I'm going to speak directly to any gay couple out there that thinks they need to push a business into providing them a service. If you're walking into a restaurant, you step in, and this restaurant's open for business, then that restaurant has no business telling you you can't be there just because you're gay. But if you want to suddenly perform a ceremony there, then that business has every right to tell you that you cannot do that at their location, or that they refuse to participate in it. Because there is a difference, and your rights and their rights are equal in this fight. You want to talk about equal protection of the law, utilizing the 17th Amendment as your argument for why every state should permit same-sex marriage. But there is, in fact, no place in the Constitution where any couple, gay, straight, any other combination, whatever, no constitutional protection, no right, no guaranteed of marriage, period. Do you know why? Because the framers never thought that would be an issue. The framers never believed that the government had a role to play in marriage. And it has the same thing to do with the reason that I've explained before when we've talked about same-sex marriage. Is it right? Is it wrong? Blah, blah, blah. I'm not against same-sex marriage. I take a lot of heat from my conservative friends over that.